12-year-old Maya hadn't said a single word out loud in over a year. Not to her teachers, not to her therapist, not even to the kind woman who brought her warm soup every Sunday evening and sat quietly beside her on the couch, just in case Maya ever wanted to talk. She hadn't spoken since the night everything changed, the night the shouting stopped. The door slammed, and then came the silence that felt heavier than any noise ever had. Before that night, Maya had been a quiet kid, sure, but not silent. She'd hum while drawing, giggle when her favorite cartoon came on, and sometimes even argue with her little brother over who got the last cookie. But after that night, after the police came, after the flashing lights painted red and blue streaks across her bedroom wall, after she'd been wrapped in a scratchy blanket and led out of the house by someone whose badge said officer, something inside her shut down. It wasn't that she couldn't speak. It was more like her voice had packed a tiny suitcase and walked out the door, leaving behind only gestures, nods, and the occasional scribbled note on a torn piece of notebook paper. At first, everyone thought it was temporary. Shock, they called it. Trauma response. They expected her to start talking again once she felt safe. But weeks turned into months, and still, no words came from her lips. She moved in with her aunt, a gentle woman with tired eyes and strong hands who'd lost her own daughter years before, and now seemed to pour all her love into Maya like she was trying to fill an invisible cup that kept leaking. The aunt never pushed. She just left space on the couch, at the dinner table, in the quiet hours before bedtime. Space for Maya to be however she needed to be. School was the hardest part. Kids whispered. Teachers tried too hard. Some would crouch down and say things like, "You can talk to me, sweetie," in voices so sugary they made Maya's stomach twist. Others ignored her completely, as if silence meant she wasn't really there. But one teacher, Ms. Rivera, the art instructor, never treated her like a problem. She just handed Maya a sketchbook on the first day and said, "Draw what you feel." No words needed, and Maya did. Page after page filled with dark clouds, locked doors, shadowy figures, and strangely dogs. Always dogs. Big ones, small ones, ones with floppy ears and kind eyes. She didn't know why, but dogs felt safe in a way people didn't anymore. Then came the letter. It arrived in a crisp white envelope with official-looking lettering. The trial was finally happening. Her stepfather, the man who'd lived with them for 3 years, who'd smiled at school events and fixed the porch swing, but whose hands turned cruel when no one was watching, was going to court. And they needed Maya to testify. Her aunt read the letter aloud at the kitchen table, her voice steady but her fingers trembling slightly around the paper. Maya didn't cry. She just stared at her cereal bowl, the milk slowly turning the cornflakes into soggy mush. Inside, though, her chest felt like it was full of buzzing bees. Testify in front of strangers? In a courtroom with high ceilings and hard wooden benches and people staring? She couldn't even say good morning to the mailman. How could she possibly tell a room full of adults what he'd done? But the social worker explained it gently during their next visit. "You don't have to speak out loud, Maya. There are other ways. We can use your drawings. You can write things down, and there's someone who might help you feel calmer while you're there." That's when they told her about the dog. Not just any dog. A special one. A courthouse facility dog, trained to sit with child witnesses during trials. His name was Atlas, and he'd helped dozens of kids just like her. Kids whose voices had gone quiet because the world had hurt them too much. He wasn't a pet. He wasn't a guard dog. He was calm, steady, and trained to respond to subtle cues like a hand resting on his back or a light tap on his side. He could sense panic before it showed on someone's face. He knew when to lean in closer and when to give space. And most importantly, he never asked for anything in return except a quiet moment and maybe a scratch behind the ears. Maya didn't say yes right away. She just listened, her eyes wide, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. But that night, she dreamed of a golden dog with soft eyes sitting beside her on a wooden bench, his warm body pressed against her leg like an anchor in a stormy sea. A week later, she met him. It was at the Advocacy Center, a quiet building with soft lighting and couches that smelled like lavender. Atlas walked in on a loose leash, his handler beside him, but his eyes went straight to Maya the moment she stepped through the door. He didn't bark. He didn't jump. He just sat, tail thumping softly against the floor, and looked at her like he already knew her story. Maya stood frozen in the doorway. Her aunt gave her a gentle nudge forward. Slowly, heart pounding, Maya took one step, then another, until she was close enough to see the flecks of white around his muzzle and the way his ears twitched when she moved. She reached out a hand trembling and let him sniff her fingers. Then carefully she crouched down. Atlas leaned into her, resting his head on her knee. And for the first time in over a year, Maya felt something unclench inside her chest. Not all the way, but enough to take a full breath. They practiced together after that. Twice a week, Atlas would come to the center, and Maya would sit with him while her therapist talked about the courtroom, the judge, the questions she might be asked. At first, she just held his leash and buried her face in his fur when the anxiety crept in. But over time, she started using small signals. 2 taps on his shoulder meant, "I need a break." A gentle stroke down his back meant, "I'm okay." They even practiced sitting on a mock witness stand, Atlas lying quietly at her feet, his presence like a silent promise. You're not alone. Still, the thought of the real courtroom made her stomach drop. She'd seen pictures, cold, formal, full of strangers in suits who spoke in sharp, fast words. What if she froze? What if she couldn't even hand over her notebook? What if the man looked at her from across the room with those eyes that used to make her feel small and scared? Her aunt held her tight the night before the trial. "You don't have to be brave all at once," she whispered. "Just be you. Atlas will be right there. And I'll be in the back watching. Every second." Maya nodded, but she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She thought about the drawings she'd made, the ones she'd hidden under her mattress for months. The one where she was curled under the bed, hands over her ears. The one where a shadow reached through the doorway. And the one she'd drawn last week. A golden dog standing in a beam of sunlight, blocking the shadow with his body. Morning came too soon. The sky was gray, the air crisp with the first hint of autumn. Maya dressed slowly, choosing her favorite sweater, the soft blue one that didn't scratch, and her worn-out sneakers. She packed her notebook, her pencil, and a small photo of her and her little brother at the beach, back when things were still okay. Then she clipped on Atlas's special courthouse vest, a bright blue one with facility dog stitched in white letters, and walked out to the car, her hand resting on his back the whole way. The drive to the courthouse was quiet. Her aunt didn't try to fill the silence with chatter. She just drove, one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally reaching back to squeeze Maya's knee. Atlas sat between them in the back seat, calm as ever, his head resting on Maya's lap like it belonged there. When they pulled up to the courthouse, a tall stone building with tall columns and heavy doors, Maya's breath caught. It looked even bigger in person, colder. She didn't move. Her fingers tightened in Atlas's fur. "It's okay," her aunt said softly. "We don't have to go in yet. We can sit here as long as you need." So they did. For 10 minutes, maybe 15. They just sat in the car while Atlas sighed contentedly and the city hummed around them. Cars passed. A bird landed on the sidewalk. Somewhere a bell rang, and slowly Maya's heartbeat slowed from a frantic drum to something steadier, quieter. Finally, she took a deep breath, opened the car door, and stepped out. Atlas followed without being told, his leash loose in her hand. He didn't pull. He didn't lag behind. He just walked beside her, matching her pace, his presence a quiet rhythm beside her own. Inside the courthouse, the air smelled like old wood and floor polish. People hurried past in suits and heels, talking into phones or flipping through files. Maya kept her eyes down, focusing on Atlas's ears bobbing in front of her. They checked in at the front desk, then were led down a hallway to a small waiting room with soft chairs and a water cooler. Her therapist was already there, along with the prosecutor, a woman with kind eyes and a voice that didn't sound like it was trying to sell anything. "We're all ready when you are," the prosecutor said gently. "There's no rush," Maya nodded. She sat on the edge of a chair, Atlas curling up at her feet like he'd done it 100 times before. She reached into her bag and pulled out her notebook, flipping to a blank page. With careful letters, she wrote, "What if he looks at me?" The prosecutor read it, then knelt down so she was at Maya's eye level. "He won't be able to see you directly from the defense table. And if he does look, you don't have to look back. You can look at Atlas, or at me, or at your notebook. This is your time, Maya. You're in control." Maya swallowed. She wrote, "What if I can't do it?" The woman smiled softly. "You already are." Outside the door, footsteps echoed. A bailiff appeared, "They're ready for you in courtroom 3. Maya's stomach dropped again. But before the panic could rise, Atlas shifted, pressing his warm side against her leg. She placed her hand on his head, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. It was real, solid, alive. She stood up, one step, then another. The hallway seemed endless. Portraits of stern-faced judges watched from the walls. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Her sneakers squeaked softly on the polished floor. Atlas walked beside her, his gait calm, his tail giving the occasional slow wag. Not excited, just present. Then they reached the courtroom doors. They were tall, made of dark wood with brass handles that gleamed under the lights. The bailiff opened one just wide enough for them to slip through. Inside, the room was even more imposing than she'd imagined. High ceilings, rows of wooden benches, a raised bench at the front where the judge would sit. To the left, a table with serious-looking people in suits, her legal team. To the right, another table where he would sit. Maya didn't look that way. She kept her eyes straight ahead. And then she saw the witness stand. It was just a small wooden box with a microphone, but it looked like the loneliest place in the world. Her legs felt like jelly. She stopped. Atlas sat. Then he looked up at her, his brown eyes steady, waiting. She took a breath. Then another. She wasn't alone. Hand on his leash, heart pounding but not breaking, Maya walked forward, toward the stand, toward the truth, toward the first real chance she'd had in over a year to say in her own way, "This happened, and I'm still here." And as she stepped up onto the witness stand, Atlas settled at her feet, his warm body a silent promise beneath the cold formality of the courtroom. She didn't speak, but for the first time in a long time she felt like maybe, just maybe, her voice hadn't left forever. Maybe it was just waiting for the right moment, the right companion, the right kind of courage, and that moment was now. The courtroom felt like another planet, cold, quiet, and too big for someone who'd spent the last year folding herself into the smallest corners she could find. Maya stood on the witness stand, her hands gripping the edge of the wooden box like it might float away if she let go. The microphone loomed in front of her, silver and stiff, as if it expected words to pour out the moment she opened her mouth. But her throat was dry. Her chest was tight, and the silence inside her felt louder than ever. She kept her eyes down, focused on the smooth, worn wood of the stand. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, lawyers, court reporters, the jury in their neat rows, but she didn't look up. Instead, she shifted her foot just slightly, letting her sneaker brush against the warm fur of the dog lying calmly at her feet. Atlas, just feeling him there, solid and steady, made her shoulders drop a fraction of an inch. The judge sat high above everyone, behind a wide wooden bench that looked like it had been carved from something ancient and unmovable. He was an older man with silver hair combed neatly to the side and glasses that sat low on his nose. His expression wasn't unkind, but it wasn't soft either. He carried himself like someone used to order, to control, to things going exactly as they should. When the prosecutor had first asked if Atlas could stay with Maya during her testimony, the judge had frowned, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Courts are not therapy sessions. We maintain decorum here." But then the prosecutor had explained quietly, respectfully, about trauma, about selective mutism, about how children like Maya often couldn't speak when fear took over, but could still communicate in other ways. She'd mentioned studies, court precedents from other states, and the simple fact that without some support, Maya might not be able to testify at all. The judge had been silent for a long moment. Then he'd glanced down at Maya, who was sitting in the back row at the time, her fingers tangled in Atlas's leash, her eyes fixed on the floor. Something in her stillness must have reached him because he finally nodded and said, "Very well. The dog may remain on the condition he does not move, bark, or distract the proceedings in any way." Now, as Maya stood before him, the judge cleared his throat. "Do you understand that you are under oath?" he asked, his voice deep but not unkind. Maya didn't answer with words. Instead, she gave a single, slow nod. The prosecutor stepped forward. She was a woman with short dark hair and a calm way of moving, like she'd learned long ago that rushing never helped anyone tell the truth. She smiled gently at Maya. "It's okay," she said softly, just loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "You don't have to say anything out loud. We can go slow. You can write, or show us your drawings, or just nod or shake your head. Whatever feels right. Maya swallowed. She reached into the small bag hanging from the back of the witness stand, the one her aunt had packed with her notebook, a pencil, a bottle of water, and a folded tissue, and pulled out her sketchbook. She held it tightly against her chest like a shield. "Thank you," the prosecutor said. "Now I'd like to ask you about the night of October 12th last year. Do you remember that night?" Maya's breath hitched. October 12th. The night the shouting had turned into something worse. The night she'd hidden under her bed with her hands over her ears, praying for it to stop. The night she'd heard glass break and then silence. A silence so deep it felt like the whole world had stopped breathing. She nodded again, but her fingers started to tremble. The sketchbook wobbled in her hands. She tried to steady it, but her arms felt weak, like they were made of wet paper. Her heart began to race, thudding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The walls seemed to close in. The air got thinner. She looked down at Atlas. He was watching her, his head tilted slightly, his brown eyes soft and knowing. He didn't move, but he shifted his weight just enough so his side pressed more firmly against her leg. It was a tiny thing, barely noticeable to anyone else, but to Maya it was like he was saying, "I'm here. Breathe." Still, the panic kept rising. Her vision blurred at the edges. She couldn't think. Couldn't remember what she was supposed to do. The questions, the courtroom, the people, it was all too much. Then, without thinking, her right hand dropped from the sketchbook and tapped Atlas twice on his left shoulder. It was a signal they'd practiced over and over in therapy. 2 quick taps meant "I need to show, not say." Atlas didn't hesitate. As if he'd been waiting for it, he gently nudged the small backpack at Maya's feet with his nose. It was the same bag she'd brought from home, the one with her drawings and her written account inside. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Some people leaned forward. Others exchanged quiet glances. The defense attorney stood up quickly. "Your Honor, I object. The dog is interfering with the testimony." "This is highly irregular." The prosecutor turned calmly. "Your Honor, this was pre-approved as part of the child's communication method. The dog is responding to a trained cue, not acting on his own." The judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at Maya. She was pale, her knuckles white around the sketchbook, but her eyes were locked on Atlas, as if he were the only real thing in the room. He paused. Then he said, "Overruled. Let the witness proceed in the manner she's prepared." Relief washed over Maya like cool water. She knelt down slowly, careful not to bump the microphone, and opened the backpack. Inside, on top of everything else, was a folder with her name on it. She pulled it out and handed it to the prosecutor, her hand still shaking, but less now. The prosecutor took it gently. "Thank you," she said. Then she turned to the judge. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to submit this as part of the witness's testimony. It contains written statements and drawings created by the child over the past several months with her therapist." The defense attorney stood again. "Objection, Your Honor, hearsay. These are not sworn statements. They weren't made under oath, and they're clearly influenced by leading questions from adults." The prosecutor didn't flinch. These materials were created independently, during trauma-focused therapy, and have been reviewed by a licensed child psychologist. They're consistent with the child's behavior and history. Under Rule 803(4) and child witness exceptions, they're admissible as statements made for medical diagnosis and as corroborative evidence of trauma response. The judge didn't answer right away. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the soft ticking of a clock on the wall and the quiet breathing of the people inside. Maya stayed kneeling, her hand resting on Atlas's back. She could feel the steady rise and fall of his ribs. In, out, in, out. She matched her breath to his. Finally, the judge spoke. "Given the circumstances and the witness's documented condition, I'll allow the materials to be entered as evidence. However, the prosecution must lay proper foundation before any portion is read aloud." The prosecutor nodded. "Of course, Your Honor." She turned back to Maya. "Can you tell us, however you're able, when you started making these drawings?" Maya picked up her pencil and a blank sheet from her sketchbook. Her hand moved slowly at first, then with more confidence after he left. "I couldn't talk, so I drew." She held up the paper. The prosecutor read it aloud for the record. "And did anyone tell you what to draw?" Maya shook her head firmly. Then she wrote, "No, they came from me." The prosecutor smiled slightly. "Thank you. She opened the folder and pulled out the first drawing. It was simple but powerful. A small figure under a bed, hands over ears, eyes wide with fear. Above, a shadowy shape loomed in a doorway. On the wall, a clock showed 2:17 a.m. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, "this drawing corresponds with the police report filed that night, which notes a disturbance call at 2:15 a.m. and arrival on scene at 2:23. The judge studied the drawing. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened just a little. Then came the next page, a written account in careful, looping handwriting. He said if I told, no one would believe me. He said I was lucky he stayed. I didn't feel lucky. I felt small, like I disappeared." Maya watched as the prosecutor read those words aloud. Her chest ached, but not in the same way it used to. It wasn't just pain anymore, it was truth. And somehow saying it, even silently, made it feel less like a secret she had to carry alone. The defense attorney shifted in his seat. He looked uncomfortable, like the ground beneath him was tilting. But Maya wasn't done. She reached into the folder again and pulled out another drawing, one she hadn't shown anyone yet, not even her therapist. She'd made it just 3 nights ago after a dream that left her sweating and wide awake until sunrise. This one showed 2 figures outside the house that night. One was her stepfather, being led away in handcuffs by a police officer. But behind a tree, half hidden in shadow, was another person, a man in a dark jacket watching. Maya pointed to that figure, then looked up at the prosecutor with wide, urgent eyes. The prosecutor frowned. "Is this someone you saw that night?" Maya nodded quickly, then wrote, "He was there. He helped hide it before." A hush fell over the courtroom. Even the judge sat up straighter. The prosecutor turned to the bench. "Your Honor, this may be new evidence. We'll need to investigate this individual immediately." The judge's voice was low, serious. "See that you do." Maya didn't understand all the legal words flying around her, but she understood this. Something had shifted. The story wasn't just hers anymore. It was bigger. And for the first time, she didn't feel like the only one holding it. She sat back on the witness stand, exhausted but strangely lighter. Atlas rested his chin on her knee, his eyes half closed as if he too knew they'd crossed a threshold. Outside, the sky had begun to clear. A sliver of sunlight slipped through the high courtroom windows and landed on the floor near Maya's feet, right where Atlas's tail gave a slow, quiet wag. She didn't speak. But in that moment, she didn't need to. The truth had found its voice, not in words, but in courage and color, in the quiet loyalty of a dog who knew when to nudge a backpack and when to simply stay. The moment the new drawing left Maya's hands, the air in the courtroom changed. It wasn't loud or dramatic, no gasps, no shouting, but something quiet and heavy settled over everyone, like a thick curtain had been pulled back to reveal a room no one knew was there. The prosecutor held the paper carefully, as if it might dissolve if she gripped it too hard. Her eyes scanned the image again, the house, the police car, the man in cuffs, and the shadowy figure behind the tree, half hidden but unmistakably watching. Maya sat very still on the witness stand, her fingers resting lightly on Atlas's back. She could feel the warmth of him beneath her palm, the steady rhythm of his breathing, and it kept her grounded. But inside, her mind was racing. She hadn't planned to show that drawing today. She'd only made it a few nights ago, after waking up from a dream so vivid it felt real. The sound of low voices outside her window, the crunch of gravel under shoes, the way the streetlight had flickered just before everything went dark. In the dream, she'd seen that second man clearly. Not just a shape, but a face. And when she woke up, heart pounding, she'd grabbed her sketchbook and drawn him before the memory could fade. Now, seeing the prosecutor's expression, the slight furrow in her brow, the way her shoulders tensed, Maya realized this wasn't just another picture. This was something new, something important. The judge leaned forward slightly, his glasses catching the light. "Counsel," he said, his voice low but firm. "Is this the first time you've seen this drawing?" The prosecutor turned to him. "Yes, Your Honor. This was not part of the original disclosure. It appears to be a recent addition." The defense attorney stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Introducing new unverified material mid-testimony is prejudicial and violates discovery rules. We had no notice of this alleged second person." This is a fishing expedition disguised as child testimony. The prosecutor didn't flinch. Your Honor, the witness is a trauma survivor with selective mutism. She communicates through art and writing. This drawing emerged organically during her testimony, a direct response to recalling the night in question. We're not accusing anyone yet. We're simply acknowledging that her memory has surfaced new information that warrants investigation. The judge was silent for a long moment. He looked down at Maya, who was staring at her lap, her shoulders hunched slightly as if trying to disappear. But Atlas shifted beside her, pressing closer, and she straightened just a little. Finally, the judge spoke. The court recognizes the unusual nature of this development. However, given the witness's condition and the potential relevance of this information, I will allow the drawing to be marked as evidence. The prosecution may pursue leads, but no conclusions will be drawn in this courtroom until proper verification is completed. A quiet murmur passed through the jury box. One woman leaned over to whisper to the man beside her. The court reporter's fingers flew across the keyboard, capturing every word. Maya didn't understand all the legal talk, but she understood this. They believed her enough to look. The prosecutor turned back to her, her voice gentle again. Maya, can you tell us, however you can, what made you draw this second person? Maya picked up her pencil. Her hand moved slowly at first, then with more certainty. I saw him before. Not just that night. He came to the house. They talked in the garage. He gave him money once. I hid in the laundry room and heard. She held up the paper. The prosecutor read it aloud, her voice steady but with an edge of urgency. The defense attorney threw up his hands. Objection. This is pure speculation. A child hiding in a laundry room overhearing muffled conversation does not constitute evidence of criminal conspiracy. Overruled, the judge said sharply. The witness is recounting her lived experience. Let her continue, the prosecutor nodded. Maya, do you remember what this man looked like? Anything about him that stood out? Maya thought for a moment. Then she flipped to a fresh page in her sketchbook and began to draw. Not the full scene this time, just a face. She worked quickly, her pencil moving with a confidence that surprised even her. Round glasses, a scar above his left eyebrow, a baseball cap pulled low. She added a detail she hadn't even realized she remembered until now. A tattoo on his neck just below his ear. It looked like a bird, maybe a raven. When she was done, she held it up. The prosecutor's eyes widened slightly. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, with permission, I'd like to share this with the investigating officers immediately. Granted, the judge said. A bailiff stepped forward and took the drawing, nodding as he tucked it into a folder and slipped out of the courtroom. Maya exhaled. She hadn't known she could remember that much. All this time, she'd thought the memories were just blurry shadows, too scary to hold on to. But drawing them, putting them on paper, made them real, yes, but also smaller. Like taking a monster out of the dark and seeing it had limits. Atlas let out a soft sigh and rested his head fully on her knee. She scratched behind his ears, and for the first time that day, the tightness in her chest began to ease. The prosecutor sat down for a moment, flipping through the rest of the folder. Maya, she said after a pause, you've been so brave. Is there anything else you need to share? Anything at all? Maya hesitated. Then she reached into her backpack again and pulled out a small folded piece of paper, one she'd written weeks ago but never shown anyone. It was a list, not of events but of things she'd been too afraid to say out loud, even in writing. Things like, he told me no one would care. He said I deserved it. I thought it was my fault. She didn't hand it over right away. Instead, she looked at the judge. Really looked at him. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes weren't cold anymore. They were listening. Slowly, she unfolded the paper and placed it on the edge of the witness stand. The prosecutor picked it up and read it silently. Her throat moved as she swallowed. Then quietly, she said, Your Honor, this is a personal statement from the witness. I don't believe it's necessary to read it into the record, but I do believe it shows the depth of psychological harm inflicted. The judge nodded once. Noted. Then something unexpected happened. The judge stood up, not in anger, not to adjourn. He simply rose from his bench, walked slowly down the 2 steps, and approached the witness stand. The courtroom went utterly still. Even the clock seemed to stop ticking. He stopped a few feet away, careful not to loom over her. He crouched slightly, just enough to be closer to her eye level, and said, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard it, You've done something very hard today, and you've done it with more courage than most adults ever show. Thank you.
Maya didn't cry, but her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded quickly. Looking down at Atlas, to keep them from falling, the judge straightened, gave a small nod to the prosecutor, and returned to his bench. No one spoke. No one moved. It was as if the whole room was holding its breath. Then the prosecutor said, "Your Honor, unless the defense has questions for the witness." The defense attorney stood, but he looked less certain now. He cleared his throat. "No questions, Your Honor." It wasn't a victory cheer. It wasn't a dramatic confession. But it was something. It was acknowledgement. It was space. The judge turned to Maya. "You may step down whenever you're ready." Maya took a deep breath. She stood up slowly, her legs a little shaky, and stepped off the witness stand. Atlas rose with her, staying close to her side as if tethered by an invisible thread. She walked back to the waiting area where her aunt was sitting. Eyes red but proud, arms open. Maya didn't run. She didn't collapse. She just walked, step by step, until she reached her aunt's arms. And when she was wrapped in that familiar hug, smelling like lavender and home, she finally let the tears come. Quiet ones, healing ones. Outside the courtroom, word began to spread. A courthouse clerk told a reporter waiting in the hall. A police officer called his sergeant. By lunchtime, detectives were pulling old neighborhood surveillance footage, cross-referencing known associates, and circulating the sketch of the man with the raven tattoo. But none of that mattered to Maya right then. All that mattered was that she'd faced the room full of strangers, the high bench, the microphone, the memories, and she hadn't broken. She'd bent, yes, she'd trembled, but she'd stayed. Back in the quiet advocacy room down the hall, Maya sat on the couch with Atlas curled at her feet. Her aunt handed her a cup of warm apple juice. No words, just presence. The prosecutor came in a few minutes later, not in her courtroom suit, but with her jacket off and her sleeves rolled up. "You did something incredible today," she said, sitting across from them. "That drawing, it's already leading somewhere. We think we know who that man is. And if we're right, this case just got a lot bigger." Maya looked up. She didn't write anything. She just met the woman's eyes and gave a small, tired smile. It wasn't a full sentence. It wasn't a courtroom confession. But it was a beginning. Later that afternoon, as they walked out of the courthouse, the sun was lower in the sky, casting long golden shadows on the sidewalk. People hurried past, unaware of what had just unfolded inside those stone walls. But Maya felt different, lighter somehow, like she'd carried a stone in her chest for over a year, and today she'd finally set it down. Atlas walked beside her, his leash loose in her hand, his tail wagging softly. Every few steps, he'd glance up at her as if checking, "You okay?" She was not healed, not fixed, but okay. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Back at home, her little brother was waiting on the porch. He didn't say anything either. He was only 6, and he didn't know all the details. But he ran to her the moment she stepped onto the driveway and wrapped his arms around her waist. She hugged him back, tight, and rested her chin on his head. Inside, dinner was already on the table. Her aunt had made her favorite, mac and cheese with peas mixed in, just how she liked it. No one talked about the trial. No one asked for details. They just ate and laughed at something silly the dog did and watched the sunset through the kitchen window. Later, as Maya lay in bed, sketchbook open on her lap, she drew one more picture, not of shadows or locked doors or hidden figures. This time, she drew herself, standing tall, hand on Atlas's back, sunlight on her face, and in the corner, small but clear, she wrote 2 words she hadn't used in over a year. "I'm here." She didn't say them out loud, not yet, but she wrote them, and that was a kind of voice too. Downstairs, her aunt sat at the kitchen table, staring at her phone. A notification had just popped up. New lead confirmed. Suspect identified. Warrant in process. She smiled softly, wiped her eyes, and whispered to the quiet room. Good. Upstairs, Maya closed her sketchbook, turned off the light, and fell asleep with Atlas curled at the foot of her bed. Guardian, friend, and silent witness to a truth that had finally found its way into the light. The days after the courtroom felt strange, like walking through a world that had been turned upside down and was still settling back into place. Maya didn't go back to school right away. Her aunt said it was okay to rest, to breathe, to just be. And for the first time in a long time, Maya didn't feel guilty for needing that space. She spent her mornings curled up on the porch swing with Atlas at her feet, sketching the way the leaves moved in the wind, or how the neighbor's cat stretched in a patch of sunlight. She didn't draw shadows anymore, not unless they were just part of the picture, like the soft outline of a tree on the sidewalk, or the gentle curve of her brother's back as he napped on the couch. But while Maya's world slowed down, the world outside moved fast. That drawing, the one with the man behind the tree, had sparked something. Within 48 hours, detectives had matched the description to a name. He wasn't a stranger. He was someone who'd lived just 2 streets over, a handyman who'd done odd jobs around the neighborhood for years. People remembered him as quiet, polite, the kind of guy who'd fix your gutter without asking for payment. But police records told a different story. Past charges for theft, a suspended license, and, most importantly, phone records that placed him in contact with Maya's stepfather dozens of times in the months leading up to the arrest. Then came the surveillance footage. Grainy, black and white, but clear enough. From a gas station camera half a mile from Maya's old house, it showed the handyman's truck parked near the curb on the night of October 12th. He wasn't just passing by. He stayed for 23 minutes, long enough to talk, long enough to help clean up, long enough to be part of something he shouldn't have been. The prosecutor called Maya's aunt that evening. Her voice was calm but urgent. "We're filing charges," she said. "Accessory after the fact, obstruction of justice, and possibly conspiracy. We believe he helped hide evidence, maybe even coached the stepfather on what to say to police." Maya's aunt listened quietly, her hand pressed to her chest, like she was holding her heart in place. When she hung up, she didn't tell Maya all the details, not yet. But she did say, "Something good came from your courage. You helped uncover more than anyone expected." Maya just nodded. She didn't feel like a hero. She still couldn't say good morning to the mailman. She still startled at loud noises. But something inside her had shifted. It wasn't that the fear was gone. It was that she now knew she could carry it without breaking. A week later, the news broke. Not on the front page, but in the local paper and a short segment on the evening news. Second suspect arrested in child abuse case, following new evidence from witness testimony. The report didn't name Maya, of course. They called her a minor victim and showed only a blurred sketch of the second man, the one with the raven tattoo. But Maya recognized him instantly, and so did half the neighborhood. People started talking, not in whispers this time, but in hushed, angry tones. How could someone live so close and not see? How could he pretend to be kind while helping cover up something so cruel? The handyman's house was quiet now. Curtains drawn, lawn uncut. For sale sign appeared 2 days after his arrest. But the real turning point came in court. Not Maya's courtroom, but a different one, down the hall. Her stepfather had been waiting for sentencing. He'd pleaded guilty early on, hoping for leniency. But now, with this new evidence, the judge wasn't feeling generous. During the sentencing hearing, the prosecutor stood and laid out everything: the original abuse, the lies, the cover-up, and the role the second man had played in trying to bury the truth. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The facts were heavy enough on their own. Then she did something unexpected. She asked if Maya would be willing to submit a victim impact statement. Not in person, but in writing, something the judge could read before deciding the sentence. Maya thought about it for 2 days. She sat with her sketchbook open, pencil hovering over a blank page, unsure what to say. She wasn't angry in the way people expected. She didn't want him locked away forever out of revenge. What she wanted was to be believed, to be safe, to stop feeling like the bad thing that happened was somehow her fault. So she wrote, "Before that night, I used to sing in the shower. I don't anymore. I used to sleep with my door open. Now I lock it. I used to trust grown-ups. Now I watch their hands, but I'm still here. And I'm learning to take up space again." She didn't sign it with her name. Just, "A girl who's getting louder." Her aunt handed the letter to the prosecutor with tears in her eyes. "She's not just surviving," she said. "She's rebuilding." When the judge read those words in court, he paused for a long time. Then he looked at the man standing before him, shoulders slumped, eyes down, and said, "You didn't just hurt a child. You stole her voice, her safety, her sense of belonging in the world. And you tried to hide it with lies and silence. But silence doesn't always mean absence. Sometimes, it's just waiting for the right moment to speak." He sentenced him to the maximum allowed by law. But the story didn't end there.
Because of Maya's drawing, investigators reopened 3 other cold cases in the county. Cases where children had reported abuse, but there wasn't enough evidence to move forward. In 2 of them, the same handyman had done work around the homes. In 1, he'd even been listed as a character witness. Now, with his arrest and the pattern emerging, those cases were being re-examined. New interviews were scheduled. New evidence was being collected. Maya didn't know all this at first, but one afternoon, her therapist came to visit with a quiet smile and said, "Because of you, other kids might finally be heard too." Maya looked down at Atlas, who was lying on the rug, tail thumping softly. She reached out and scratched his ears. "Did we do that?" She wrote on a notepad. "You did," her therapist said gently. "You told your truth in the way only you could." And it opened a door. Meanwhile, something else was changing, inside the courthouse itself. Judge Ellery, the man who'd once frowned at the idea of a dog in his courtroom, began asking questions. He met with the district attorney. He read reports about trauma-informed justice. He even visited the advocacy center where Maya had first met Atlas. He watched how the dogs worked, not as distractions, but as bridges. How a child who couldn't speak would relax the moment a calm dog leaned against their leg. How a simple presence could make the unbearable feel possible. A month after Maya's testimony, the judge issued a formal recommendation that the county establish a permanent courthouse facility dog program. Not just for high-profile cases, but for any child witness dealing with trauma, abuse, or extreme anxiety. He cited Maya's case not by name, but as a powerful example of how compassion and procedure can coexist. The local paper ran a small article about it. The headline read, "Judge champions quiet witnesses after emotional courtroom moment." People started calling. Other counties wanted to know how to start their own programs. A nonprofit offered to fund the training of 2 new dogs. And Atlas? He became something of a quiet celebrity among the courthouse staff. Bailiffs would slip him treats when no one was looking. The clerk in courtroom 3 kept a water bowl just for him. But to Maya, he was still just Atlas, her anchor, her silent partner, the one who knew when she needed to tap his shoulder instead of speak. Then came the day she did something no one expected. It was a Tuesday. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Maya was sitting at the kitchen table, coloring in a new sketch. A picture of a courtroom, but this time, the witness stand had a dog beside it, and the girl on the stand was smiling. Her aunt was washing dishes, humming an old song under her breath. Maya put down her pencil. She looked at her aunt, and then so softly it was almost lost in the sound of the rain, she said, "Can we go to the park?" Her aunt froze. The dish she was holding slipped slightly in her soapy hands. She turned slowly, eyes wide, voice trembling. "Did you just—" Maya nodded, her cheeks pink, but she didn't look away. "Yeah," she whispered. I said it. It wasn't a long sentence. It wasn't a speech. But it was real, and it was hers. Her aunt dropped the dish into the sink, turned off the water, and crossed the room in 3 quick steps. She knelt in front of Maya and wrapped her arms around her so tightly it almost hurt, but in the best way. "You did," she whispered into Maya's hair. "You really did." Atlas, who'd been napping under the table, lifted his head and let out a soft, happy sigh, as if he'd been waiting for this moment too. That afternoon they went to the park. Not the big one with crowds, but the small neighborhood one with the old oak tree and the rusty swing set. Maya didn't talk much, just a few words here and there. "Look, a squirrel," or "push me higher." But each one felt like a miracle. On the way home, she held Atlas's leash and said something else, even quieter. "Thank you." He didn't know if she was thanking him or her aunt, or maybe just the universe for giving her a chance to come back to herself. But it didn't matter. The words were out there now, floating in the air like dandelion seeds, light and full of possibility. Back at the house, her little brother was waiting on the porch again. When he saw her, he ran over and tugged her sleeve. "Did you talk?" he asked, eyes wide. Maya smiled, a real smile, not just a polite one, and said, "A little." He grinned and threw his arms around her. "I knew you would." That night, Maya didn't draw shadows. She drew the park, the swing, the rain, her brother's grin. And in the corner she wrote, "Today I used my voice." She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe she'd go back to school soon. Maybe she'd testify again if they needed her for the second trial. Maybe she'd stay quiet most days and only speak when it mattered. And that was okay, because she'd learned something important. Her voice wasn't gone. It had just been waiting for safety, for support, for a golden dog who knew when to nudge a backpack and when to simply sit beside her in the silence. And now, slowly, beautifully, it was coming back. The morning of the sentencing hearing for the second man, the one from the drawing, felt different. Not heavy like before, but quiet in a peaceful way, like the air after a long rain. Maya woke up early, not because she was anxious, but because she wanted to be ready. She picked out her clothes carefully. Soft jeans, a sweater the color of pale sky, and the sneakers she'd worn to court the first time. They were scuffed now, but they felt like armor. Atlas lay on the rug beside her bed, already awake, watching her with those calm, knowing eyes. He didn't need to be told what day it was. He seemed to sense it, the shift in the house, the way her aunt moved a little slower, the extra care in how breakfast was made. When Maya knelt to tie her shoes, he rested his head on her knee, just like he had in the courtroom. "You coming with me?" she asked softly. He blinked once, then stood up and gave a single, firm wag of his tail. That was his yes. Downstairs, her aunt handed her a thermos of warm apple cinnamon tea, the kind that smelled like comfort. "You don't have to speak today," she said, brushing a strand of hair from Maya's face. "Just being there is enough," Maya nodded. She knew that, but something inside her felt ready, not fixed, not whole, but steady, like a tree that had weathered a storm and was still standing, even if some branches were bent. The courthouse was quieter this time. Fewer reporters, fewer strangers. The trial had already happened. The second man had pleaded guilty after the evidence stacked up too high to deny. Today was just about the sentence, but Maya wanted to be there. Not for him, for herself, to see it through to the end. When they walked into the courtroom, the judge was already seated. He looked up as they entered, and for the first time he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not to her aunt, not to the lawyers, but to Maya. It wasn't pity. It was respect. She took her usual seat in the front row, Atlas settling at her feet without a sound. The prosecutor smiled when she saw her. "Glad you're here," she whispered. The second man was brought in wearing orange jail scrubs. He kept his eyes down, shoulders hunched, as if trying to make himself smaller. He didn't look at Maya. Maybe he couldn't. Or maybe he finally understood the weight of what he'd done, not just helping cover up the abuse, but making a child feel even more alone by pretending everything was fine, while twisting the truth behind closed doors. The prosecutor stood and spoke clearly, laying out how his actions had prolonged the harm, delayed justice, and added layers of fear for a child who was already drowning in silence. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The facts were sharp enough on their own. Then the judge turned to Maya. Would the witness like to say anything before I deliver the sentence? A hush fell over the room. Even the clock on the wall seemed to pause. Maya's heart pounded, but not with fear. With purpose. She stood up. Atlas rose with her, staying close, his presence like a quiet hum beneath her skin. She walked to the front, not to the witness stand this time, but to a spot near the railing where she could face the judge directly. She took a breath and then, in a voice that was soft but clear, clearer than anyone had heard in over a year, she said, "He made me feel like no one would ever believe me, like I was the only one who saw what was really happening. But I wasn't alone. Atlas was with me. My aunt was with me, and now, you are too." She paused, her hands trembling just a little, but she didn't look down. She looked right at the judge. "I don't want him to hurt anyone else. Not ever again, that was all. Just 2 sentences. But they filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. The judge didn't speak right away. He took off his glasses, set them on the bench, and looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were wet, not crying but close. Then he said, his voice rough with something deeper than duty, "Thank you for your courage. You spoke louder than words ever could." He turned to the man in the orange scrubs. "You didn't just fail to report a crime. You actively helped hide it. You used your position as a trusted neighbor to manipulate the truth and protect someone who hurt a child. That betrayal cuts deeper than violence alone, because it steals hope." He sentenced him to a lengthy prison term, longer than many expected. But no one argued. Not even the defense attorney. It felt right. Not as revenge, but as balance. As protection for other kids who might one day need to be believed. Afterward, as people began to file out, the judge did something no one had ever seen him do before. He stepped down from the bench, not in a rush but with quiet intention, and walked over to where Maya stood near the courtroom doors. He didn't crouch this time. He just stood before her, tall but gentle, and said, "You've changed more than just your own story today. You've changed how this court sees courage." Maya didn't know what to say, so she just nodded and whispered, "Thank you." And then, because it felt like the right thing to do, she reached out and gently patted Atlas's head. The judge followed her gaze and smiled, a real smile, warm and tired and full of something like wonder. Outside, the sun was shining. Not too bright, not too hot, just golden and kind. Maya's little brother came running across the courthouse steps waving a drawing he'd made. A girl, a dog, and a judge with a heart on his robe. "I drew you!" he shouted, shoving it into her hands. She laughed. Actually laughed. A sound so rare and bright it made her aunt stop in her tracks and press a hand to her mouth. They walked to the car together. Maya, her brother, her aunt, and Atlas padding along beside them like he belonged exactly where he was. No one spoke much. They didn't need to. The air felt lighter, like a burden had been lifted not just from Maya, but from everyone who'd carried a piece of her silence. That evening, back at home, something small but important happened. Maya sat at the kitchen table with her sketchbook open. She wasn't drawing shadows or locked doors or hidden figures anymore. This time she drew the courtroom, but not as a place of fear. She drew it with sunlight streaming through the windows. The judge's bench softened by warm lines, and in the front row, a girl with her hand on a golden dog's back, looking not at the floor but straight ahead. In the corner, she wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Her aunt read it over her shoulder and kissed the top of her head. "You always were," she said. A few days later, a letter arrived. Not from the court, but from the advocacy center. Inside was a photo. Maya and Atlas, taken the day after the first trial, sitting on the courthouse steps, her head resting lightly on his. Beneath it, a note. "Because of you, 2 new courthouse dogs are being trained. Their names are Hope and Valor. They'll start next month." Maya taped the photo to her bedroom wall right above her bed. Every morning she'd wake up and see it, proof that her silence had spoken and been heard. She started going back to school slowly, just a few hours at first. Ms. Rivera, the art teacher, didn't make a big deal out of her return. She just handed her a fresh sketchbook and said, "Draw whatever feels true today." And Maya did. Sometimes it was clouds. Sometimes it was her brother making a silly face. Sometimes it was Atlas sleeping in a sunbeam. And sometimes, when no one was looking, she'd write words in the margins, just to feel them on the page, to remind herself they were hers to use. "Hello. I'm okay. Today was good. She still didn't talk much in class. But when the teacher asked a question and Maya knew the answer, she raised her hand. Not every time, but sometimes, and each time her voice came a little easier. One afternoon she even read a short poem aloud in English class, just 4 lines about a dog who carried silence like a gift. Her hand shook and her voice wobbled, but she finished it. And when she sat down, the room didn't erupt in applause, but a few kids smiled. One gave her a thumbs up, and that was enough. Life didn't magically become perfect. There were still nights when a loud noise made her jump, still moments when the old fear crept in like a shadow. But now she had tools. She had people. She had a voice, even if it was still learning its strength, and she had Atlas. He still came with her to therapy, still sat with her during hard conversations, still knew without being told when she needed to tap his shoulder instead of speak. But more and more she didn't need to. More and more she chose words. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies blink in the dusk, Maya leaned her head against her aunt's shoulder and said, "Do you think I'll ever be normal again?" Her aunt was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You were never not normal, sweetheart. You were just carrying something heavy, and you're still carrying it, but now you're walking with it, not under it." Maya thought about that. Then she looked down at Atlas, who was watching the fireflies with quiet fascination. "Yeah," she said softly. "I think I am." Months passed. Seasons turned. The case faded from the news, but its ripples remained. The courthouse now had a quiet corner where kids could meet facility dogs before testifying. Teachers in the district received training on trauma responses, and in a small office downtown, a new program helped children tell their stories through art, writing, and yes, sometimes, with a calm dog beside them. Maya never asked for any of that. She just told her truth in the only way she could at the time, and the world, slowly, made space for it. On the 1-year anniversary of her first day back at school, Maya stood in front of her class during morning circle. She didn't have to, but she wanted to. "I used to not talk," she said, her voice steady now, clear and calm. "Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I was too scared to say it. But I learned that my voice matters, even when it's quiet, even when it's just a drawing, even when it's just a tap on a dog's shoulder." She paused, then added with a small smile, "And now, I'm getting louder." No one clapped, but the room felt full, of respect, of understanding, of shared humanity. After school, she walked home with her brother, Atlas, trotting happily beside them. The sun was warm on her face. Birds sang in the trees. And for the first time in a long time, Maya didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was living. And that, more than anything, was the real victory.